In the 1970s and 80s, there was a water park in New Jersey that was unlike any other. It was a place where teenagers operated rides with minimal training, where safety regulations were merely suggestions, and where injuries were so common they became part of the experience. This is the story of Action Park, the most dangerous amusement park in America. Action Park opened in 1978 in Vernon Township, New Jersey, created by entrepreneur Gene Mulvihill. His vision was simple but radical. Give people the freedom to control their own rides and experiences. No hand-holding, no over-supervision, just pure, unfiltered fun. And for a while, it worked. Action Park became wildly popular, drawing hundreds of thousands of visitors every summer. It was marketed as a place where you could truly cut loose, where the rules of normal amusement parks didn't apply. Their unofficial motto said it all. There's nothing in the world like Action Park. They were right, but not in the way they intended. The park was divided into several sections, but it was the water rides that made Action Park legendary and lethal. These weren't your typical water slides. They were experiments in physics and pain, designed with more ambition than engineering expertise. Let's start with the cannonball loop. Imagine a water slide that sends you through a complete vertical loop like a roller coaster, but with water and your body sliding against fiberglass at high speed. The loop was so extreme that test dummies came out dismembered. When they finally opened it to the public, riders regularly emerged with bloody noses, bruises, and occasional lost teeth. The slide was open for less than a month before being shut down permanently. Then there was the Tarzan swing. Riders would grab a rope, swing out over a pool of freezing spring water, and drop in. Simple enough, right? Except the water was so cold, around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, that people would go into shock upon entering. Lifeguards pulled out unconscious swimmers almost daily. The Alpine slide was perhaps the most notorious attraction. It was a long concrete track down the side of a mountain where riders sat on small sleds with a single hand brake. The problem? The brake barely worked. The track was often wet or littered with debris, and riders frequently lost control. People crashed into each other, flew off the track, and scraped themselves bloody against the concrete. The park went through so many bandages that they bought them in bulk. The kayak experience sent people down a whitewater rapids course with minimal instruction. Capsizing was common. Injuries were frequent. And the water was filled with snakes from a nearby den that had made their way into the park's waterways. Then there was the aqua scooter slide where you rode on a thin piece of plastic across water. The problem was the water was only about an inch deep over hard concrete. If you didn't maintain perfect balance, you'd crash directly into concrete at high speed. But the crown jewel of danger was the tidal wave pool, ominously nicknamed the grave pool by lifeguards. It was one of the largest wave pools in the world, generating waves up to 6 feet high. The pool was always overcrowded, and many guests didn't know how to swim. Lifeguards made dozens of rescues every single day. Over the park's history, multiple people drowned in this pool alone. So how did Action Park get away with this? How was it allowed to operate for so long despite the obvious dangers? The answer is complicated. Gene Mulvihill was politically connected and knew how to work the system. When people got hurt, the park would often settle quickly and quietly. They required guests to sign liability waivers, which in the 1980s provided more legal protection than they do today. And perhaps most importantly, the park generated enormous revenue for the local area. Vernon Township wasn't going to kill its golden goose. The staff were mostly teenagers, sometimes as young as 14 or 15, with minimal training. Lifeguards were overwhelmed and underprepared. Ride operators often didn't understand the equipment they were supervising. Some employees admitted to drinking on the job. It was chaos. Gene Mulvihill himself seemed to embrace the mayhem. He saw injuries as the price of freedom, the cost of real adventure. When critics called the park dangerous, he'd essentially shrug and say that's what made it fun. He even tried to dodge liability by taking out insurance policies in the names of his teenage children. The injuries were constant and varied. Broken bones, concussions, lacerations, dislocations. These were daily occurrences. The local hospital became so familiar with Action Park injuries that emergency room staff could identify where someone had been hurt just by looking at them. But injuries weren't the worst of it. Between 1978 and 1996, 6 people died at Action Park. One drowned in the tidal wave pool. Another died on the Alpine slide when he went off the track. A man died of a heart attack in the cold water. Each death brought investigations, But somehow, the park always managed to reopen. Despite all this, or perhaps because of it, Action Park developed a cult following. For many teenagers and young adults in the 80s and 90s, Action Park represented freedom and rebellion. It was dangerous, yes, but it was also thrilling, in a way that modern, safety-obsessed parks could never be. People would come back year after year, comparing scars and swapping war stories. Getting hurt at Action Park became a badge of honor. The park's reputation for danger actually became part of its marketing appeal, drawing people who wanted to prove they were tough enough to handle it. But by the mid-1990s, the lawsuits were piling up, insurance costs were skyrocketing, and the regulatory environment was changing. Action Park, as it existed, couldn't survive in the modern world. In 1996, the park was sold and renamed Mountain Creek Water Park. The new owners kept some attractions, but implemented actual safety standards, hired properly trained staff, and redesigned the most dangerous rides. The Wild West days were over. Gene Mulvihill tried to stay involved, but was eventually forced out. He died in 2012, still defending his creation to the end. To him, Action Park represented a kind of freedom that Americans had lost the freedom to take risks, to get hurt, to learn through experience, rather than being bubble-wrapped by regulations. For a brief period in the 2010s, the park even reclaimed the Action Park name, trying to capitalize on nostalgia while maintaining modern safety standards. But it wasn't the same. The danger was gone, and with it, the appeal for many former fans. So what's the legacy of Action Park? On one hand, it's a cautionary tale about what happens when profit and ego take priority over safety. 6 people died. Countless others were seriously injured. Families were traumatized. For them, Action Park wasn't fun. It was a nightmare. On the other hand, it represents something that's largely disappeared from American culture: genuine risk. In an era of helicopter parenting and litigation paranoia, we've largely eliminated danger from everyday life. Action Park was a place where you could genuinely hurt yourself, where consequences were real, where you had to take responsibility for your own choices. Was that a good thing? That depends on who you ask. Former visitors often speak of Action Park with genuine fondness, remembering it as the most fun they'd ever had, despite or because of the danger. They'll tell you that modern water parks are boring by comparison, that kids today are missing out on something valuable by growing up in such a safe, controlled environment. But the families of those who died would tell you a different story. They'd tell you that no amount of fun is worth a human life, that safety regulations exist for a reason, that Gene Mulvihill was a reckless businessman who put profits over people. Both perspectives have truth to them. Action Park existed in a specific time and place, a moment in American history when regulations were looser, when litigation was less common, when people had a different relationship with risk and danger. That moment has passed, and it's not coming back. Today, every amusement park ride is meticulously engineered, thoroughly tested, and constantly monitored. Staff receive extensive training. Safety protocols are rigid and enforced. Injuries are rare, and deaths are almost unheard of. This is undoubtedly better for public safety, but it's also sterile, controlled, and predictable in a way that Action Park never was. The story of Action Park is ultimately the story of America's changing relationship with risk. It's about the tension between freedom and safety, between adventure and responsibility, between the thrill of the unknown and the comfort of control. Action Park was dangerous. Action Park was reckless. Action Park was irresponsible. But for one brief, chaotic moment in New Jersey history, Action Park was also unforgettable. And there really was nothing in the world like it.